But let's go to Jeremy Corbyn, former Labour leader, big Arsenal supporter, of course.
Yes.
Sitting in the studio next to me. Okay, so is the BBC right to suspend him, yes or no?
Wrong. Completely wrong.
Why?
He's got a perfect right to express an opinion. Even within the BBC's own code, they're allowed to express opinions, providing it doesn't, of a partisan nature, providing it doesn't impinge on their area of work. His area of work is sport. Others, Alan Sugar and many others, have made the most partisan comments in the past.
Against you?
Against me, yes.
Amongst others. Yeah.
Amongst others, but against me particularly. I remember it very, very well. And absolutely nothing was done, despite complaints being made to the BBC. They've sort of come down like a ton of bricks on Gary Lineker. And whilst I support what Gary said, and I think he's a decent human being in the way he's put it and said it, unfortunately, the whole debate now is shifting onto Gary and the BBC and ignoring the issue of this, I think, disgraceful piece of legislation that Parliament's about to debate on Monday.
The small boats. Well, we're going to get onto that as well in this interview. We've got Amber Rudd, the former Home Secretary, talking about that later in the programme too. So the two are linked, of course. But I just also wonder, and I started this programme by talking about language. The government, Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, when she proposed this bill, used, what's the right word? Strong language, abrasive language. Some would call it extreme language. She talked about 100 million people who want to come to this country. The whole issue of stop the boats, the way it was emblazoned in block letters on the Prime Minister's specially made lectern for his presentation of the bill. It is about the strength of the language as a means of deterrence, telling people who might want to get on a boat, don't bother doing this because you're not going to end up in paradise. You'll end up in a detention centre and possibly back from where you came. So the strength of the language is part of the issue here, is it not?
I went to Calais last month and met people there who've come by truck, walking from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria, from Libya, from Sudan, and many other places, totally desperate people. They are not listening to speeches by Suella Braverman or anybody else.
So the deterrence doesn't work, you're saying?
They haven't got a clue what's being said in this country. They're more interested in how they're going to get a glass of water and how they're going to feed themselves, and desperate to get somewhere to live. But you know what? The asylum seekers that do get here and eventually, hopefully, get their papers and so on sorted out, tomorrow they're going to be our doctors, our teachers, our lawyers, our engineers, and so on. Why can't we have a sense of humanity towards what are absolutely desperate people? You or I wouldn't get on a leaky dinghy to go across the Serpentine. They are risking everything because they believe that this country will at least treat them fairly and properly.
So, given the fact that you don't like the language used by the government, again, I get back to that question.
Sure.
Did Gary Lineker use the right language when he went for the nuclear option? And this is literally the kind of the last resort comparison. You compare someone to the Nazis.
Well, the one who
then,
used
you're in a different realm, aren't you?
Sure. I think we have to be very careful ever comparing things to Nazis. The Holocaust was the most vile thing that ever happened in our history. However, I would just draw attention to the fact that it was Joan Salter, who herself is a Holocaust survivor, who drew the parallel of the language being used by the Home Office and the hateful language used by the Nazis during their ascent to power in Germany in the 1920s and 30s.
So let me ask you very basically then, so with the language he used in his tweet, are you with Gary Lineker, yes or no?
I'm with Gary Lineker, yes.
Okay, and how should the BBC handle this?
Well, I think they should reinstate him and let him get on with his excellent job presenting Match of the Day, and accept that he has an opinion which is at variance of that of the government. And your caller earlier, Charlie from Fulham, who was saying that had he supported the government, would this have happened? Well, obviously it wouldn't.
Yeah.
We have two people heading the BBC, the chair and the director general, both, how should I put it, very closely associated with the Conservative Party. What we need is public service broadcasting. Yes, we need it to be independent, obviously, but we also need it to be accessible and representative of the whole country.
But, when it comes to language and the right use of language, the right use of nuance, I mean, you yourself got into trouble, the Labour Party got into trouble over its alleged anti-Semitism, right? That's also about perceptions. And you're paying the price for that because you're not allowed to run as a Labour MP in the next election. So you know about the use of language.
The use of language is very, very important.
And did you make a mistake there yourself?
I don't think I did. What I was doing...
But the party thinks you did. The party you served for decades thinks you did.
Some people in the party don't agree with a lot of things, particularly other political views that I have. But first of all, I just think anti-Semitism is a vile and evil thing. And the language I used was, one anti-Semite in the Labour Party is one too many. That wasn't given publicity.
Right. I think it was, actually, and I think it was even on this programme. So it has been, the BBC has been accused of buckling to the right-wing press and to this government. Do you think the Labour Party has buckled on issues like immigration, on issues like the strikes?
Yes, I do,
no?
Because I think that the response given by the Labour front bench to Suella Braverman's statement in Parliament earlier this week went on about the process and alleged failures of it and so on. It didn't, in my view, show the empathy that should be shown to desperate people, and also allowed the exaggeration of numbers to go on. 70,000 people sought asylum last year by this means. That is less than the number that attend a football match in a country of 65 million people. And they've got to be desperate to even put themselves in that danger. Can't we work with other European countries, work with the United Nations, work with the human rights and refugee councils on giving a safe route for people? After all, we were 20 years in Afghanistan, 10 years in Iraq. Many of these people are coming from countries where we have sent troops there.
But the point is that the humanity towards asylum seekers has gone out of fashion, hasn't it? I mean, in France, even in Germany, which has taken in huge numbers compared to us, and it's selective. So there's a massive amount of compassion for Ukrainians.
Yeah.
There's less compassion for some Afghans as well, especially those who serve British forces. There's a lot of less compassion for Somalis or Eritreans.
Well, indeed, and it's there's awful double standards at work here. I absolutely support and welcome Ukrainian refugees into this country, and they should be treated properly, and by and large they are. We should have the same attitude towards all other refugees. Why do people leave their homes and go in enormous danger in order to try to get to a place of safety? History is going to be very unkind to the politicians of the early part of the 21st century who descended into this ghastly rhetoric against people looking for a place of safety.
Let's end, and I know you're running out of time and have got to go, but let's end with a few quick questions. How damaged is the BBC by all this?
Extremely damaged in public perception at a very dangerous time for them because of, after all, the whole licence renewal and everything else that's coming up in the next few years. I think it's extremely damaged.
Is there a way back for Gary Lineker?
I think Gary Lineker should be reinstated straight away to present Match of the Day. Gary Lineker is a big figure. I'm not saying he's bigger than the BBC, but he is very big, and the BBC ought to realise that.
And what about Tim Davie, the Director General of the BBC?
I think he should go. I don't think he should ever have been appointed. He's far too partisan.
Richard Sharp, the Chairman of the BBC?
Likewise.
They should all go.
Both of those should go, and there should be much more independent, credible figures to head the BBC to show that it really is an independent public service broadcaster.
I mean, this is, colleagues of mine, friends of mine who work for the BBC, they feel, very conflicted by all this.
Yes.
They're in a tricky position. What do you say to, your ordinary BBC foot soldier who's out there, paid by the licence fee, not on a massive salary, trying to do their work?
I support them. I have many people in my constituency at work at the BBC. I've got a lot of time for them, but I think the solidarity shown by Ian Wright and others towards Gary Lineker is significant and very important. This is a turning point in the public debate about refugees. Can
you win the next election in your constituency, which you've been winning elections in for decades, without being a member of the Labour Party?
Listen, I'm not going to answer the question of whether I'm running as on what label, but I'm very confident I could win an election in Islington North, yes.